As the morning light poured onto the cobblestone streets of Beacon Hill, Boston's upscale neighborhood, Elizabeth Gardner was sipping her coffee in her apartment. Beyond the deciduous trees visible from her window, the Charles River flowed leisurely. As was her habit, Elizabeth had opened her sketchbook before work this morning. As an interior designer, Liz was passionate about bringing her clients' dreams to life. Her designs, which combined delicate sensibility with practicality, were highly regarded even in Boston's upper society. However, she herself maintained a life somewhat distant from the glamorous social scene. "Good morning, David. You're early today." Liz smiled at the tall man who entered the kitchen. David Carter was an architect she had met at a charity event 2 years ago. Like Liz, he valued the balance between creativity and practicality, and their relationship had evolved from a professional partnership into a deep affection. "I have an early meeting today. But before that, I wanted to see your face." David put his arm around Liz's shoulder and kissed her forehead. Their relationship had become serious a year ago, and they had been going back and forth between each other's apartments ever since. Liz's smartphone rang, indicating a call from her mother. She let out a small sigh before answering. "Good morning, Mom." "Liz, don't tell me you've forgotten about dinner tonight?" "Amanda says she has special news." Diane's voice on the other end had its usual tight tone. She was someone who valued etiquette and tradition, even among Boston's refined social circle. "I haven't forgotten, Mom. I'll be there at 7. After keeping the conversation with her mother brief, Liz looked at David. "Amanda has some announcement to make. Probably another work boast." Her sister Amanda worked as a buyer for a luxury fashion brand in New York and seemed to take pleasure in showing off her glamorous career in front of the family. 3 years ago, when she got engaged to Jason Monroe, the heir of a distinguished Boston family, her parents' expectations had risen even higher. "Amanda always wants to be the center of attention," David said as he drank his coffee. "But it's clear that you're the one with real talent." Liz smiled, but her smile was somewhat sad. Since childhood, her parents' attention had always been focused on Amanda. Liz had learned to live quietly in the shadow of her sister's brilliance, as the responsible eldest daughter. That evening, Liz headed to the Gardner family home. Her father Victor was known as a person with strong connections in the financial world even after retiring as an executive of an investment bank. He was a gentleman of the old school who valued tradition and formality above all else. When she entered the living room, Amanda was already chatting with their parents. Her sophisticated fashion sense always drew attention. "Finally here, Liz," Amanda said as soon as she saw her sister. "You're late." "It's exactly 7 o'clock, Amanda," Liz replied, looking at her watch. As dinner began, the conversation naturally centered on Amanda. She passionately talked about the luxury brand project she had recently handled, and their parents listened proudly. "So, what's the special news?" Liz asked as the meal was drawing to a close. Amanda smiled smugly and announced, "Jason and I have finally decided to look at wedding venues. Next month." "Wonderful!" Diane exclaimed joyfully. "After waiting 3 years, we must have a grand celebration. I wanted to prepare everything perfectly, in line with the Monroe family tradition." Amanda raised her glass. "Besides, our relationship is so stable that we don't need to rush." Liz listened silently. Jason Monroe and Amanda's engagement had been grandly announced 3 years ago, but the wedding date had constantly been postponed. She sensed something behind Amanda's words but didn't voice it. "Liz, how about you and David?" her father Victor suddenly asked. "Is it a serious relationship?" Liz was momentarily surprised but answered in a calm voice. "Yes, very. Actually, Jason's company is starting a new project in Boston," Amanda interrupted her sister. "We might start living between Boston and New York next year." Her parents' attention turned back to Amanda, and Liz's words were left hanging in the air. She quietly took out her cell phone and looked at a message from David. "How's it going? Enjoying family time?" Liz smiled slightly. Only David understood the complexity of her family relationships. She typed a message. "The usual. But I'm fine. Because I have you. There was something Liz had known for a while but hadn't told anyone yet, the fact that David was Jason Monroe's cousin. It was a coincidence, but it was strange that Amanda had never mentioned this connection. As dinner ended and her father offered brandy, Liz looked at her watch and stood up. I should be going now. Early start tomorrow. Always work, Amanda sighed. You should show your face in social circles sometimes. Jason's connections could get you good jobs. Liz smiled gently. Thank you, but I'm satisfied with my current work. As she was leaving, her mother saw her to the door. Liz, you should think more about your future. You're 34. Liz nodded silently. After getting into her car, she let out a deep sigh before turning on the ignition. They didn't know that a week ago, David had proposed to her. That she had said yes. And that she still hadn't found the perfect timing to reveal this happy secret to her family. When she got home, Liz stared at the small velvet box sitting on the living room table. Inside was a modest but beautiful diamond engagement ring. She gently took out the ring and put it on the ring finger of her left hand. Looking at the ring shining under the light, Liz wondered how she could make her family understand her happiness. Especially given the fact that her sister Amanda was already engaged. Liz decided to tell her parents about the engagement over the weekend. David had offered to go with her, but she said, I want to talk to my family first, and went alone. As she passed through the gates of the Gardner home, Liz's heart was filled with anxiety and expectation. When she entered the living room, she found not only her parents but also Amanda, who said she was spending the weekend in Boston. I heard you have something special to talk about, Amanda said, settling deep into the sofa. I came in a hurry. Liz took a deep breath and extended her left hand. David and I are engaged. After a moment of silence, her mother Diane spoke. Well, that's wonderful. There was no warmth in those words. When are you thinking of having it? Her father Victor asked. His expression showed no sign of joy at his daughter's engagement. We're thinking about June. We've already looked at June. Amanda cried out. That's when Jason and I are looking at venues. You haven't decided on a venue yet, have you? Liz said calmly. Besides, we want a small ceremony. Wait, Amanda stood up. Her face was contorted with anger. I got engaged first. Why are you getting married first? Liz looked at her sister with a confused expression. It's been 3 years, Amanda. And David and I. Think about my position. Amanda's voice echoed throughout the room. Everyone will say, Amanda's been engaged for 3 years, but her older sister got married first. Her parents turned toward Amanda. Victor said in a solemn voice, Liz, there's an order in family matters. Since Amanda got engaged first, it's natural that she should marry first. Liz had an incredulous look on her face. That's absurd. We're adults. Such order doesn't. Liz, her mother Diane interrupted. Think about the family's appearance. In society, these things matter. Society? Liz laughed bitterly. I just want to start a life with the man I love rather than care about such things. Amanda, with tears in her eyes, said vehemently, you only think about yourself. You're ruining my engagement. Liz stared at Amanda. What's really the problem? You're the one who's been postponing the wedding for 3 years, aren't you? Shut up. Amanda shouted. You don't understand. My relationship with Jason is complicated. Liz said quietly, did you know that David is Jason's cousin? The room fell silent. Amanda's expression froze. What are you talking about? Diane asked. David is Jason's cousin. I heard it from him. But for some reason, Amanda never mentioned it. Amanda blushed and said, that's irrelevant. I didn't know. Liz saw through Amanda's lie but didn't pursue it further. She stood up and said, we're getting married in June. I thought my family would be happy for us. But if that's not possible. Liz, calm down, Victor said in a stern voice. We should discuss this as a family. Discuss what? Liz laughed bitterly. You mean I should comply with Amanda's demands? We just want you to respect tradition, Diane said. Since the second daughter got engaged before the eldest, that order should be maintained. Liz let out a deep sigh. There's a dinner with David's family next Saturday. I'd like all of you to come. As she left the house, Liz felt Amanda's cold gaze on her back. The next day, Liz told David about her family's reaction. Just as I imagined. Amanda was furious, and my parents took her side. David took her hand. It's all right. My parents genuinely welcome you. When your family meets them, I'm sure they'll reconsider. However, the day before the dinner, Diane called. Amanda is feeling unwell. We need to be with her. Liz gripped her cell phone. Mom, this is an important dinner. Can't you come even for just an hour? We can't. Amanda is saying, think about your sister's position. We can't leave her alone. Liz fell silent. On the night of the dinner, despite the warm welcome from the Carter family, it was evident that Liz's family seats were empty. David's mother Abigail gently placed her hand on Liz's shoulder. You must feel sad about your family's absence. But from now on, you're part of our family too. Liz smiled while holding back tears. David's father Jonathan also encouraged her similarly. Jonathan asked about Jason, but Liz merely answered vaguely, he's very busy. That night, when Liz returned to her apartment, she found a message from Amanda. If you betray the family, don't come to the wedding. Think about my and Jason's position. Liz stared at the screen. Her decision was firm. She loved David and would start a life with him. Even without her family's blessing. On the morning of her wedding day, Liz looked out the hotel window at the rising sun. June in Boston was bathed in gentle light, and the trees in the park shimmered in deep green. She looked at the white wedding dress hanging on a hanger. The day she had dreamed of since childhood. She had imagined choosing a dress with her mother, walking down the aisle with her father's arm. But reality was different. A quiet knock sounded, and the door opened. It was David's mother, Abigail. How are the preparations coming along? She asked kindly. Let me know if there's anything I can help with. Liz smiled. Thank you, Abigail. I really appreciate it. Abigail approached Liz and placed her hand on her shoulder. Today is your special day. Don't look sad. I'm fine, I'm happy, Liz said, but tears glistened in her eyes. Just a little. Abigail silently embraced Liz. No words were necessary. In the arms of the kind Abigail, Liz shed tears for just a moment. Then she took a deep breath and composed herself. Now, let's prepare the bride, Abigail said cheerfully. Normally, sisters or close friends would surround her as bridesmaids. But today, only David's mother was helping Liz. She arranged her hair, applied makeup, and helped her into the dress. When she stood before the mirror, she saw the image of a beautiful bride. But in her eyes, there was a shadow mourning the absence of her family. After the bride's preparations were complete, Abigail said, "You look wonderful, Liz." David is a lucky man, and headed to the venue ahead of her. Liz remained alone in the hotel room and looked at her phone. There were no messages from her mother, no contact from Amanda. Last night, as a final attempt, she had called her parents. I'd be happy if you could come tomorrow, Liz had said quietly. I want to spend the best day of my life with my family. But her father's voice was cold. I hope you'll reconsider. Amanda is deeply hurt by this. What about her engagement? Her position in society? Dad, this is my wedding with David. It has nothing to do with Amanda's engagement. Nothing to do with it, her mother's voice came on the phone. Why are you so stubborn about ignoring family tradition? Liz answered, holding back tears, I'm just marrying the man I love. Why is that wrong? The call ended with her father's cold words. The choice is yours. Whether to respect family tradition, or... Liz shook off that memory and took a deep breath. Today was the start of a new journey with David. There was no time to dwell in sadness. Upon arriving at the venue, Liz was greeted by David's father, Jonathan. He smiled kindly and said, "Elizabeth, you look beautiful today. If you'd like, I could walk you down the aisle?" Liz was filled with gratitude, but she quietly shook her head. "Thank you, Jonathan. But I'll walk alone. This is my decision." The venue was filled with soft music, and guests were seated. Most were David's friends and relatives. A few of Liz's friends had come, but the family seats in the front row were empty. In the entrance hall, Liz took a deep breath. The music changed, and the melody announcing her entrance began to play. The doors opened, and everyone looked at her. She stood alone in the place where she should have been guided by her father's arm. After a moment's hesitation, Liz slowly began to move forward. Walking down the aisle alone was lonelier than she had imagined. Sympathy was evident in the guests' eyes. However, when she saw David's face at the altar, all of Liz's anxieties vanished. His eyes were filled with love, pride, and warmth. When Liz reached the altar, David took her hand and whispered, "You are the bravest and most beautiful bride." The priest began the ceremony, and the venue fell silent. "Who gives this bride away?" the priest's voice echoed. A moment of silence followed. Pain shot through Liz's chest. She took a deep breath and quietly answered, "They couldn't be here today." David firmly held Liz's hand, and the two faced forward. The priest cleared his throat slightly and continued the ceremony. When it came time to exchange vows, Liz's voice was strong and clear. Though she felt the absence of her family, she put her hope for building a new family into those words. "I take you as my husband, to love, honor, and cherish. In all times and places, to walk with you." David also spoke his vows similarly. His voice was filled with deep affection. During the exchange of rings, Liz's slightly trembling hand placed the ring on David's finger. David also gently slid the ring onto her finger. At that moment, warm applause came from the attendees. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss." At the priest's words, David gently drew Liz close and kissed her. Celebratory applause erupted from the venue. Liz and David turned around, holding hands, and smiled. Tears shimmered in Liz's eyes, but they were tears of joy. There was pain in her heart at the empty family seats in the front row, but now, beside her was her husband who would walk with her through the rest of her life. Having completed the ceremony, the two were preparing to head to the reception venue. Liz adjusted her bouquet, and David fixed her veil. "Any regrets?" David asked gently. Liz shook her head. "Marrying you is the best decision of my life." On their way to the reception venue, Liz and David were enveloped in the feeling of relief that the ceremony was over. Despite the absence of her family, the wedding itself had been solemn and beautiful. Receiving the warm blessings of David's relatives and friends, Liz was filled with expectation for her new beginning. Before the double doors leading into the venue, the two paused for a moment. "Ready?" David gently squeezed Liz's hand. "This is your first introduction as Mrs. Carter." Liz smiled. There was warmth in those words. Just as the announcer was about to announce their entrance through the microphone, a loud noise came from the entrance of the venue. At the same time, the sound of someone hurriedly running down the hallway echoed. "Liz. Elizabeth." Hearing that voice, Liz's body stiffened. As she turned around, she saw her parents running towards her, out of breath. Diane's perfectly styled hair was disheveled, and Victor's tie was askew. They were both pale, especially Victor, who appeared more distraught than she had ever seen him. "Mom? Dad?" Liz asked in disbelief. "Why?" David put his arm around Liz's arm protectively. His expression did not hide his wariness. People in the venue also quieted down, watching this unusual scene. "Wait, Liz." Diane cried out. "Please, listen. It's important." Victor was clutching some documents with trembling hands. Elizabeth, we need to talk immediately. Liz was confused and hesitated for a moment. This was her wedding day. She had no intention of creating a scene like this. But there was something in her parents' urgent manner that she had never seen before. An expression mixing fear, regret, and desperation. David whispered in Liz's ear, "What do you want to do?" Liz took a deep breath and regained her composure. "Let's talk in a separate room," she answered quietly. The three of them entered a small anteroom next to the venue. David agreed to wait outside the door. His concerned eyes gave Liz courage. As soon as the door closed, Diane said tearfully, "Liz, I'm so sorry. We didn't mean to ruin your wedding." Victor also unusually showed his emotions. "We made a big mistake. We should have put your happiness first." Liz folded her arms and said in a calm voice, "What have you come to say now? The ceremony is over. I walked down the aisle alone, just as you wanted." "About that." Victor handed Liz the documents he had been clutching with shaking hands. "We want you to see this." Liz reluctantly took the documents and looked through them. The first page was a legal document, and the next page had Jason Monroe's signature. On the third page was a handwritten letter. Liz's eyes widened. "This is a notice of broken engagement?" "Yes," Diane answered quietly. "Jason has dissolved his engagement with Amanda. She received it this morning. Amanda found out and contacted us," Victor continued. "She told us to show this to you directly." Liz was confused and continued reading the letter. Written in Jason's careful handwriting were the reasons for ending his engagement with Amanda. "Amanda's jealous behavior and obstruction of her sister's marriage are incompatible with the family values I seek," Jason had written. "I cannot spend a lifetime with someone who doesn't value family." The letter further stated that Amanda had intentionally tried to interfere with Liz and David's relationship, and that she had concealed the fact that Jason and David were cousins. "David told Jason that you had accepted his proposal," Diane explained. "That's how Jason learned that Amanda was hindering your happiness." Liz looked up from the letter and stared at her parents. "What about Amanda?" "She's crying and locked herself in her room," Diane sighed. "She's suffering, but she's reflecting on what she did." Victor bowed his head deeply. "We failed in our responsibility as parents. We were so caught up in tradition and appearances that we lost sight of our daughter's happiness. Because of us, Amanda became arrogant and prioritized her own wishes." Diane's voice was filled with remorse. "And we went along with her and hurt you." Liz was nearly overcome by a wave of emotions. For years, she had become accustomed to her parents prioritizing Amanda over her, but she never expected to hear them admit it. "Now we understand how lonely you must have felt," Diane continued. "Walking down the aisle alone, that's something a parent should never allow." Victor approached Liz and timidly took her hand. "I know it's too late. But would you let us celebrate our daughter's happiness, even now?" Liz looked at her parents. In her eyes was not just anger, but the sadness she had harbored for years, and now, just a little feeling of forgiveness she was beginning to feel. There was a knock at the door, and David peeked in. "Everything okay?" "The reception can start anytime." Liz took a deep breath and said, "David, come in here. We need to talk." As David entered the room, Liz handed him the documents. "Jason has broken off his engagement with Amanda." David looked surprised as he went through the documents. "He didn't tell me anything. But he did call last week and said something about making an important decision." "Did you ask why Jason had been hiding the fact that he and David are cousins?" Liz asked Victor. Victor nodded. "It was at Amanda's request, apparently. She said if everyone knew, she couldn't claim to have a more familial connection through David." Liz and David were left speechless. Amanda's jealousy and obsession were beyond imagination. "But now, everything has come to light," Diane said. "And we parents have also realized our mistakes. Liz, if you can forgive us, we'd like to celebrate your marriage from now on." Liz looked at her parents, and then at David. His eyes showed that he would support whatever decision you make. After a long silence, Liz slowly said, "You can attend the reception. But this doesn't mean I forgive you. I want you to understand. Trust isn't something that can be restored in a day." Her parents nodded with expressions mixing relief and regret. "Also," Liz continued, "tell Amanda too. There will be a chance to discuss this matter someday, but today is my and David's day. It's not a day to think about her problems." Liz adjusted the hem of her wedding dress and took a deep breath. "Now, let's go to the reception." As Liz and David left the room first, Victor whispered to Diane, "We misjudged our daughter. She is a strong woman." Diane nodded, wiping away tears. "Yes, she always has been. We just couldn't acknowledge it." The doors to the reception venue opened, and the announcer proclaimed the entry of the bride and groom. Liz and David entered hand in hand, and warm applause came from the guests. And behind them, Victor and Diane followed, looking somewhat embarrassed. On Liz's face was an expression of quiet victory that comes after overcoming hardship. 1 year later, Liz and David had invited her parents to their new home in the Boston suburbs. Early summer sunshine poured into the garden, and gentle light streamed through the large windows in the living room. Liz was thinking about the changes over the past year as she made the final preparations for the meal. "Can I help?" Diane entered the kitchen. Unlike a year ago, her attitude now had a kindness that respected her daughter. "Thank you, Mom," Liz smiled. "Would you mix the salad?" Diane nodded silently and began the task. She and Victor had gradually been rebuilding their relationship with Liz since the wedding. Restoring trust wasn't easy, but her parents continued to make sincere efforts. In the living room, Victor and David were engaged in a conversation about work. Victor, who had once belittled his daughter's husband, now recognized David's talent as an architect and sometimes even sought his opinion. "Have you heard from Amanda?" Liz casually asked. Diane's expression clouded slightly, but she answered honestly. "She calls once a week. She's trying to change." After her broken engagement with Jason, Amanda had begun working on self-improvement with a therapist. She had quit her job as a buyer for a luxury brand and started working at a small vintage clothing shop, which surprised the entire family. "I read her letter," Liz said quietly. 3 months ago, Amanda had sent Liz a long letter of apology. In it, she acknowledged that her jealousy and obsession had not only hindered her sister's happiness but had also distorted her own life. "I also know Jason is remarrying," Liz continued. Diane looked up. "Did you tell Amanda?" "Yes. On the phone. She was calmer than I expected. She said, 'I wish him happiness.'" The two exchanged meaningful glances. Amanda's growth was slow but certain. The doorbell rang, and David went to open it. Liz took the roast chicken out of the oven and finished setting the table. "Everyone, dinner is ready," Liz called to the living room, and David returned. There was a special smile on his face. "Liz, I wasn't sure if I should tell you." Victor began. "Amanda, she asked if she could come today." Liz paused for a moment. Then she took a deep breath and answered, "That's fine. She is family, after all." Before they began their meal around the table, Liz stood up. "Everyone, I have an announcement." She took David's hand. "We're expecting a baby." Tears welled up in Diane's eyes, and Victor, unusually showing emotion, exclaimed, "Wonderful." Later that afternoon, Amanda arrived. Her demeanor was different from a year ago. Gone was her flashy appearance, a more natural version of herself was there. Her reunion with Liz was a mix of awkwardness and hope. "Liz, congratulations," Amanda said sincerely upon hearing the pregnancy news. "You and David will be wonderful parents." As they walked in the garden, the two exchanged conversations slowly. While there were still wounds that wouldn't heal, they had taken the first step in reclaiming their bond as sisters. Liz looked up at the evening sky. A year ago, on her wedding day, she had stepped into the future with loneliness and determination. Now, around her was a family that, though imperfect, was on the path to recovery. And inside her, a new life was growing. It would take time to completely heal the wounds of the past. But today, in this house, there was hope. It was a quiet conviction that any difficulty could be overcome.